Colorado. So yeah, Colorado's ballot is packed this year. 13 measures, and a good resource if you want any additional information. Since there are so many measures in the ballot, this webinar will highlight some of the more notable measures. It does have a brief review of all of them, but any more details can be found at ballotpedia.org / Colorado 2018 ballot measures. And there you can find details about each measure, including things like arguments, summaries of what the measures do, campaign finance, polls, etc. So I encourage you to visit that page if you have any lingering questions as well. Okay, let's get started. So first, just kind of looking at the ballot as a whole, Colorado has the distinction of having the longest ballot with regard to ballot measures in November. There's 13 measures in the ballot. Looking at the types of measures is important. So there are 6 constitutional amendments referred to the ballot by the state legislature. And then there are 7 citizen-initiated measures that get on the ballot through a signature petition. Of those measures that are on the ballot through signatures, 3 of them would amend the Constitution. And then one of those would also change statute, as well as making changes to the Constitution. And then 4 are initiated state statutes. This distinction is especially important this year because of a measure passed in 2016 that requires a 55% approval for any constitutional amendments on the ballot. So as we go through, we'll note which ones are constitutional amendments, which ones are statutes, but those amendments are subject to a higher approval requirement. So yeah, none of the other 37 states with measures in November have 13 statewide measures. The closest is Florida with 12, which almost had 13, but one measure was thrown off the ballot by a court ruling. And then California, which has 11. Overall, California had more because they had 5 measures in the June ballot. But to give an idea of sort of the rest of the country, the next highest would be Missouri, and Utah with 7. So 13 is certainly a lot to get through. And then comparing to Colorado, this isn't unheard of. In 2006 and 2008, there were more measures, 14 specifically. And the average for the last couple decades was between 9 and 10. So just certainly above average, but Colorado does have a very sort of active direct democracy component of its political landscape. So there are a lot of measures on the ballot in a lot of even years. Looking at sort of how I selected the measures to spend more time on, one of the factors was looking at trends in 2018 as a whole. Colorado will be voting on a new method for redistricting, both for legislative and congressional districts. That's amendments Y and Z. 4 other states have redistricting measures in 2018. One was at a pre-November election in Ohio. That's an issue that sort of combines with election policy to make one of the larger trends for 2018. And there's another measure, Amendment 75, concerning campaign finance on the ballot in Colorado. And it sort of fits into that election policy trend. More than 20 measures or 20 measures in 19 states. And several of those concern campaign finance as well. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of that national context. Energy, property, and the environment is featured specifically with 2 measures, Proposition 112 and Amendment 74, which are sort of tied together. Energy, specifically regarding renewable energy and fossil fuels is a big issue in other states, Nevada and Arizona and Washington. And while these measures don't directly tie into that, especially Proposition 112 certainly has an impact on the sources of energy. So this is an issue that's getting a lot of money spent on it as well. And you'll see that Proposition 112 and Amendment 74 are the most expensive measures on the Colorado ballot. And the issue of energy in general is receiving a lot of campaign contributions throughout the country. And then taxes for education, Amendment 73 is kind of one of the remaining initiatives when there were 3 proposed, and one in Massachusetts, one in Arizona, that made the ballot and then were removed by court rulings that would increase income taxes for certain levels of income to fund education. But those will not be on the ballot. They were certified and then blocked by a court ruling. And then in Utah, sort of a similar measure that would have increased income taxes and sales taxes for education is also not on the ballot. A compromise was made and it was replaced by sort of education funding bill and a separate advisory measure. So this Amendment 73 is kind of the remaining measure that would have been a notable trend in 2018 if those measures hadn't been removed or not ultimately put on the ballot. Okay, so we can move on. Great, so let's start with redistricting. Amendments Y and Z. These measures were put on the ballot by the state legislature. Amendment Y would affect congressional redistricting. Amendment Z would affect state legislative redistricting. There was kind of a story before the measures were put on the ballot. There are two different initiative efforts circulating regarding new methods for redistricting. And the two groups involved ended up sort of meeting and providing a compromise to the legislature, and that was ultimately passed in a bipartisan vote. So that's how Amendments Y and Z got onto the ballot. And some of the campaigns and arguments surrounding these measures do look closely at the group behind the proposals that were sort of started this process. So the groups and the individuals behind the initiatives. So we don't have time to go into that in detail right now, but it's worth going to sort of look at the Ballotpedia article and see, look at the story behind how Amendments Y and Z got on the ballot, just to help understand some of the arguments that are being made, both for and against it. Okay, so the process for these measures, they would each create a separate commission if they were both approved. The commissions would each consist of 12 members, 4 from the largest parties, so 4 each from the largest parties, and then 4 unaffiliated members. The process involves a selection from applicants to create this pool of applicants. The selection of the initial pool is done by former judges, and then there's some input from legislative leaders. And then through legislative staff and sort of a complicated process, that pool is narrowed down until the final sort of selection of the commission is made. And the pool is narrowed. There's also a large component of commission members selected by chance, by lot from the remaining pool. So various legislative leaders and members of the party leadership, as well as unaffiliated members or leaders, can remove applicants from the pool, and then the ultimate decisions are made by lot. The approval of a map for redistricting for both the congressional districts and the legislative districts would require 8 of the 12 commission members to approve the map, and at least 2 of those would have to be unaffiliated members. And then the process for approving a map also involves a mandatory Supreme Court review to make sure the map sort of complies with certain criteria that are also established by the measures, which include a requirement for competitiveness, and then some more traditional requirements such as contiguous boundaries for the districts and minimizing the division of cities and counties. So far, there's a joint committee supporting both Amendment Y and Z. The committee has raised about 5.6 million. And top donors include Pat Stryker, Kent 30, and Michael Bloomberg. So yeah, let's move on to the next measure, Proposition 112. So Proposition 112 and Amendment 74 are sort of tied together, not in topic, not directly by topic, but by who's campaigning for and against them. So we'll get into that. Proposition 112 is an initiative, it's this initiative, and it's a statutory initiative that it would mandate that new oil and gas development projects, including fracking, be a minimum distance of 2,500 feet from occupied buildings. There are buffer requirements now that vary, ranging from 500 to 1,000 feet, depending on the type of building or area. So this would be an increase of existing regulations. The minimum distance would apply to any occupied buildings, and then areas designated as vulnerable, which I have the definition up there, but it includes things like playgrounds, sports fields, theaters, and then some bodies of water as well. So that's what the measure would do. The support committee is called Colorado Rising. It's raised about 1 million. There's also another committee called Earthworks Action Fund, which is also opposing Amendment 74. And you'll see it when you look at Amendment 74, there are some overlap committees there as well. The top donor so far is the Food and Water Watch Action Fund. So the opposition campaign is the reason this measure is currently the most expensive measure in Colorado, sort of tied with Amendment 74. The main committee in opposition to it is Protect Colorado. There are 5 committees registered to oppose this measure, however. So I say that there's a net total of about 18.8 million raised in opposition to Proposition 112. This does not count, and if there are any journalists on the call or people trying to understand campaign finance in Colorado better, if you just look at the total given to Protect Colorado, just since January 1, 2017 is when we're starting counting for this measure, because that committee has been around for many years, but that's when their registration changed for the 2018 cycle. So we're counting everything past then. But if you look at just that one committee, there's a lot more money listed as the total contributions to it. But there's a significant portion, of about 8 million, which actually, with the latest reports, that's likely to be up around 10 million, that the Protect Colorado committee has given to Amendment 74 support committees. So we don't want to count that money twice. So we've reduced Protect Colorado's amount by the amount that they've just provided directly to the other committee, sort of acting as a middleman in that particular instance. So other committees that are registered in opposition to Proposition 112 include a committee called Fix Our Damn Roads, which is actually primarily formed to support another measure we're going to talk about later. And then other committees, Spirit of Colorado, Americans for Prosperity. But yeah, the primary committee there is Protect Colorado. Polling has come out for just recently. The polling I list in this webinar is based on an online poll that it's actually the first public poll we've really been able to get a hold of for the Colorado proposition. So this is just based on one survey, and hopefully there'll be others to sort of make these results more concrete. But I just give that disclaimer for the polling information I give in this webinar. But this measure is polling very, very close. So 52% in support, 48% in opposition. It's sort of less than a point outside of the margin of error for the poll, which was 3.5 points. So this is neck and neck, and I expect to see a lot more money being provided for this measure, and a lot of interest being taken in it. This is probably going to be the measure that you hear the most about, see the most ads about, and that is sort of dominating news regarding ballot measures in Colorado. Yeah, and I already mentioned this, it's likely to be the most expensive ballot measure battle in Colorado. All right, so we can move on to talk about Amendment 74. So this is a constitutional amendment put on the ballot by an initiative petition, so it would require a 55% supermajority requirement, as would Amendments Y and Z, which we talked about already, as would any of the constitutional amendments on the ballot. The Committee for Colorado's Shared Heritage is the support committee for this measure. It's received 99.9% of its contributions from Protect Colorado. So I already mentioned this. The discrepancy here is there are late contribution reports, and so there's 10 million reported by the Heritage Committee from Protect Colorado. So that's why I'm guessing that very soon the Protect Colorado amount being reported as provided to the committee in support of Amendment 74 will go up to 10 million. So there's a lot of overlap between these campaigns. This measure would require that property owners be compensated for any reduction in property value caused by state laws or regulations. So it does not directly affect the oil and gas industry, or it's not framed to only affect property value decreased by regulations on fracking or oil and gas development. So the campaigns in opposition and support don't necessarily focus just on that issue. But the supporters and opponents and the money being spent on it do overlap significantly with Proposition 112. And it could be argued that one of the most one of the areas, one of the industries that would perhaps be affected the most overlaps with Proposition 112 as well. But the effects of this amendment aren't particularly known. There was a similar measure passed in Oregon in 2004, and that it's worth looking at that measure, and that's the only example we really have of a measure like this prior to Amendment 74. So top donors to the support committee are the Anadarko Petroleum Corporation, Noble Energy Inc., and PDC Energy. Opposition includes several committees. There's some overlap, like I mentioned. The main committee is Save Our Neighborhoods. Other committees that overlap with 112 is the Colorado Rising Committee. And then there are two others, Win the Fourth and Earthworks Action Fund, which are registered to oppose this measure. The largest donors are the 1630 Fund, which is a nonprofit that focuses on social and environmental issues, the League of Conservation Voters, and Conservative Colorado. So once again, based on the only public poll we have available as of now, there's 63% support and 37% opposition for this measure. So yeah, moving on to Propositions 109 and 110. So these we're treating together because they're both bond issues for transportation. The key differences are size, what projects are required, and then probably the biggest difference is that one of them requires a sales tax to fund the bond issue, and the other one doesn't. So Proposition 109, the campaign behind it's called Fix Our Damn Roads. It's a mandatory $3.5 billion bond issue, and then there would be no tax increase to fund it. So the state would be left to, according to the measure, the state would be left to fund it from the general fund. We'll talk about this in a minute, but the state legislature passed a bill that would mandate certain actions based on the outcome of the election in 2018. And we'll go through the details there. But there is a a funding mechanism in mind already. And then Proposition 110, kind of nicknamed Let's Go Colorado, that would authorize $6 billion in bonds, and then it would provide a sales tax increase of 0.62 percentage points. And that would last for 20 years, and that would be designed to repay the bonds. So this is the legislature passed a bill to set up various situations for whether Proposition 109 passed, Proposition 110 passed, or neither of them passed. So the upshot is that if neither passes, there will be a bond referral in 2019 for $2.3 billion. So if neither of these passes in November, this will be on the ballot again in 2019, or not this particular measure, but this issue. So if Proposition 109 or both measures pass, then certain financing arrangements created in 2017, these lease purchase agreements, which are currently being issued in $500 million batches, 3 of them are left, and $100 million per year is going towards repaying that funding mechanism. So if Proposition 109 passes, these lease purchase agreements would be repealed, and that $100 million that's being currently allocated to repay that funding mechanism will go towards the Prop 109 bonds. If Proposition 110 passes, but Proposition 109 does not pass, then the 2017 lease purchase agreements will stay in place, and the bill allocates an additional $50 million per year to the State Highway Fund. And then, like I said, if neither passes, the lease purchase agreements stay in place, the $50 million allocation per year goes into effect, and voters will be asked about another bond referral in 2019. I think we have a little more information on Prop 109 and 110, describe the support and opposition. There's some overlap here as well. I think the campaigns would prefer to see, obviously, their measure pass and the other fail. There have been some statements on both sides, sort of to the effect of it would be better that both of these pass than neither of these pass. To that point, these measures don't directly compete with each other with regard to their major provisions. So if both pass, the Legislative Council has basically said that there might be some details that have to get worked out with regard to which provisions are in conflict. But for the most part, that would just mean that there was that much more funding available to the Transportation Department. So they would sort of both be in effect. Stay on that slide. Yeah, thanks. So support and opposition. You can see the fixed our dam roads and the newly created no on 110, yes on 109. Those are the committees in support of 109. The top donor is the Independence Institute. They have about $500,000. That's a nonprofit based in Golden, Colorado. And then the 110 committee, support 110 and sort of partially oppose 109 as well. That committee is outspending or outfunding the 109 committee by a fair margin, looking at 6.4 million there. And the two committees that are most active are Coloradans for Coloradans and Coloradans for a Responsible Future. I mean, you see the top donors there are construction industry, National Association of Realtors, and the Chamber of Commerce. Okay, so moving on. I mentioned Amendment 73. This is also a citizen initiative. In Colorado, this is just a side note, that if it's the amendment has a number, then it's put on the ballot by an initiative petition. If it has a letter as part of its name, then it was put on the ballot by a vote of the legislature. So this is a citizen initiative, still requiring the 55% supermajority requirement. So this would change the income tax system in Colorado from a flat tax of 4.63% as of 2018 to a bracketed tiered system. And then for the 4 tiers above $150,000, the income tax would range between 5% and 8.25%, with the top bracket being income above 500,000. The measure also has other provisions, so it would increase the corporate tax rate from 4.63% to 6%. And then it would have a decrease in the property taxes. So a 0.2 percentage points decrease in residential property tax, and then a 5-point decrease in non-residential property tax. This measure is polling at 58% support and 42% support, according to the same online poll that we have available to us right now. That, as a reminder, that is it looks like a lot of support, but it's not very far above the 55% supermajority requirement. So it's worth, whenever looking at polling information for Colorado in the next few weeks, keeping in mind the additional requirement. Okay, so moving on to the Campaign Finance Amendment, Amendment 75. And I'm not going to go into too many details on this one. I wanted to mention it because this issue is being addressed in a lot of states in 2018. South Dakota, North Dakota, Missouri, as well as Massachusetts are all voting on the issue of political spending and campaign contributions. A lot of the measures that are being voted on in other states either have sort of a limitation on what can be spent, or provide a cap on certain campaign contributions. This measure is fairly unique in that it would establish a scenario in which all of the limitations that are currently provided for Amendment 75, for campaign contributions would be multiplied by 5 if one candidate for a particular state office spends more than $1 million either of his or her money or through a loan on his or her own campaign. So the current contribution limits vary by what state office it is, and then also by who's contributing the money. So there are different limits for a small donor committee and a business and an individual and a party, a political party. And I recommend going to ballotpedia.org, Colorado 2018 ballot measures, and clicking on the Amendment 75 link and sort of looking at those details. But yeah, this measure, it would just allow, if any one candidate was spending over $1 million on the campaign, it would allow increased campaign contributions to the other candidates for that office. The initiative was sponsored by two former Republican state legislators, B.G. Nickel and Greg Brophy, and it is it's polling well below the required majority requirement. In fact, below a simple majority. It's 39% support and 61% opposed, according to just the one poll that we have available right now. So moving on, we'll look at more briefly at the other measures on the ballot. So there's one more citizen-initiated measure on the ballot. It's Proposition 111. This measure would reduce the interest rates and charges allowed for payday loan businesses or short-term loan businesses. So currently there's a 45% annual interest rate is allowed, and then there are additional fees and charges, including a 20% charge on the first $300 and a 7% charge on anything above $300, and a couple others. So that would be, it would be a pretty significant decrease in the maximum authorized interest rates and fees allowed for short-term rentals. That's a statute, so it requires a simple majority, and it's currently polling at 84% support according to the one poll we have available to us. Amendment A, so the rest of these, you can see they're named by a letter rather than a number. So these are all amendments that are referred to the ballot by the state legislature. Amendment A would remove part of the Colorado Constitution that provides an exception for a ban on slavery and involuntary servitude. The exception currently allowed is for cases of punishment for a convicted crime. There was an identical measure on the ballot in 2016 that was narrowly rejected. The proponents, sort of the support campaign for this measure, say that it had to do with the ballot language that was used. While the measures are identical with regard to what effect they would have on the Constitution, which is just to remove that language providing an exception to slavery or indentured servitude ban, so that the measures are identical in effect, but the ballot language is different. So in 2016, it talked sort of more explicitly about removing that exception. And this year, the ballot language reads, shall there be an amendment to the Colorado Constitution that prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime, and thereby prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude in all circumstances. So that's different from the language used in 2016. Proponents of the measure say that's likely to make all the difference. Polling information wasn't available on this measure. Okay, Amendment V would reduce the age qualification from 25 to 21 for citizens to be members of the State House of Representatives or the State Senate. This measure, a similar measure to reduce the age limit to 21, was defeated in 2008 in Colorado. Amendment W would change the language used for judge retention questions. So for judges at all levels of the court in Colorado, after a certain amount of time has passed, they have to stand for retention at the ballot. I'm sure as anyone from Colorado is aware, when you look at the ballot, it takes up a fair amount of space. This measure was required to, instead of requiring every judge up for retention to have a separate question, just a one-sentence question asking if the judge should be retained in office, it would allow those questions to be asked once at the top of the section for that particular court level, and then just have the names of the judges listed with the options of yes to retain and no to not retain. So that's the point of that measure. Amendment X is a measure, once again referred by the state legislature. It would remove the definition of industrial hemp from the Colorado Constitution. So it would make it up to state statute or federal law to define industrial hemp. And that measure is, yeah, thanks. We can move on. Yeah, we're running out of time. We'll wait for questions. So I wanted to give the context of sort of 2018 in general. So Colorado, like we said, is 13 measures. So there are 155 total statewide measures in 37 states in November. That's out of 167 total for 2018. So there were 12 pre-November measures. Colorado is ranking 7th so far with how much money is being spent on these ballot measure campaigns. The next report is October 29, and I'm expecting there to be increases in this, but as of reports available to us now, we're looking at 31 million in contributions to support and opposition for ballot measures in Colorado. The total so far that we've tracked is 856.7 million, with 319 million in California. Nevada and Florida are the states with the next largest amounts of campaign finance reporting. And just to give some context for Colorado specifically, in 2016, there were 9 measures on the ballot, and $60 million was spent on the ballot measure campaigns. So yeah, that's the sort of the highlights for the 13 ballot measures. I really do encourage you to look deeper into all of these. There's a lot of details, and Ballotpedia is certainly a good place to start. But we can open it up to questions now.
Great. If anyone has any questions, you can either raise your hand and I can allow you to ask a question that way, or if you want to, you can drop it into the Q&A. We'll just give like 1 minute here to see if anyone has any questions. While we wait to see if anyone has any questions, do you know, Josh, were there any measures that, I don't know this, that got removed from the ballot by courts this year in Colorado?
Not after they were certified for the ballot. So there were no measures like in some other states, prominently Florida, and I mentioned Arizona and Massachusetts, and most recently in Hawaii, where the measures were all set for the ballot and then were removed sort of after they were certified. That didn't happen in Colorado.
Cool, thank you for that. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions come through, so we are going to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Josh, for your time today. If anyone has any questions about this, you can always email us at editor@ballotpedia.org. And then we will, of course, send out the PowerPoint and then the slide and then the recording of this to you in an email that you'll get tomorrow. And if you don't subscribe to our email updates, I recommend checking it out and subscribing. We are going to be sending out emails the night of on November 6th with election results. And so that will be a good way to keep up with what's going on, but maybe in a more relaxed way than following along on social media. So thank you all so much for your time. And thank you, Josh, for presenting.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Okay, goodbye all.